First of all, please let me welcome you all to our inaugural Location Powers Summit. And I'll tell you a little bit about why we're actually doing this and why it looks a little bit different in branding and so forth in a second. Just actually, before I get really stuck into this presentation though, I have two amendments to the agenda you've got in front of you. One is just to say that the presentation straight after me by Jimmy is actually on if I get the pronunciation right, Taichung City as opposed to New Taipei. And the other one you would have seen Ki Jung Lee down to talk about indoor GML, but unfortunately he couldn't get here this morning to be part of that, so George will be giving his presentation on his behalf when you see that there. So Location Powers. Just a little bit of history for the people who may not have been part of this last year. Location Powers came out of the Ideas for OGC process that happened last year. Part of that came out of a bunch of discussion around new technologies that were coming into the organisation, but it caused, I guess, a surge, if you like, of discussion, particularly around strategic areas and themes that OGC should be focusing on and having dialogue about, but potentially we didn't have a vehicle or way of having those greater strategic discussions. And so Location Powers has been really about trying to have not necessarily a technical discussion, but more of a higher level strategic discussion around particular themes and domain areas that we need to have a more global dialogue with. It's also very much about trying to engage with people that are outside of the normal OGC membership too. So there was a recognition within the Ideas for OGC process that there is a whole globe that we're trying to interact with, and a whole world of different people that we don't always get a chance to have a conversation with. So Location Powers is also about trying to engage with them. So to that end, it's also not a passive thing. This is very much about having an active conversation. So if you're sitting in front of your laptop and you're expecting today to just check your emails all day and not interact and not ask questions, you're in the wrong room. So this is about participation. It's about sharing your ideas. It is very much about highlighting both your problems and the problems you're aware of in the world, and also offering your ideas and solutions into that as well. So essentially though, Location Powers is what we are all about, and that's location and place. And it's also very much about understanding where things are and how they relate to each other. So in terms of that participation, here are some things that I ask of you today as you listen to each one of these presentations. Number one, I want every person in this room to try and ask at least one question to the experts. Got one already? Absolutely, Chris, absolutely. But please do put your hands up. I'm certainly the sort of presenter who quite likes people to put their hands up in the middle of a presentation if they've got a question, and ask it at the time, because it's quite likely that if you've got the question, somebody else does as well, so it's usually useful to do the clarification then. Please do share your ideas. Please also challenge the assumptions. The topic that we're talking about today is smart cities, and it's a fairly disparate topic in terms of the angles that people come at it from. So whilst the people you have sitting at the front of the room would be considered experts in their field, I'm sure that each one of them would actually, if they're making an assumption or they're making a statement about things, if you believe it's different or you've got something to contribute to it, I'm sure they would welcome that feedback within the process and discussion. If you use Facebook or Twitter, please do tweet today. One of the things that was really interesting to me when I started promoting today's activities was the number of people that I had globally that contacted me and said, is it going to be videoed? Is it going to be live streamed? Can I interact with this in a different way? So not everybody has amazing travel budgets to be able to travel around the world and get to each one of these activities and events. And so the linkage point for those people who are outside of this room is actually each one of you. And it's also us as an organisation. So if you use any form of social media, I really do encourage you to actually use it to help share what it is that you're seeing along the course of today. And the last thing I'm going to ask of you is that each one of you should have some plain paper in front of you. And if you don't have a pen, let me know and I will pass some around. But what I'm going to ask you to do is, normally when you come to a day like today, you have your notebook, and you'll sit there and you'll write a series of notes across the course of the day, and it will stay in your notebook, and nobody else will actually see those thoughts and ideas. What I'm actually going to ask you to do today is to share them on the paper for us to actually share that more broadly. Now, some people like to make, if we think about this, this is called visualising your thoughts. And some people like to do that in a list, which is fine. Some people might actually do a mind map in terms of the ideas and thoughts that they're having, and some people might even draw a picture. So in terms of what your skills are and what it is that you've got to offer and share, pick one of your mediums, pick and do something completely different. But please use the paper that you've got in front of you to try and capture thoughts that you have throughout the day, knowledge that you're learning, or ideas that you want to share with us in terms of the topic that we're discussing. So I'll now start talking about what we're actually going to discuss today, which is obviously smart cities. I was in Barcelona about a week ago at the Smart Cities World Expo. And it's supposed to, certainly advertised as being a big pinnacle global event in terms of looking at what smart cities are. And what I found is that every single stand and every single presentation that I went to had some sort of different definition about what a smart city actually was. And I think to that end, the way I really started to understand it is that we all come at the concept of a smart city from a different perspective. Each one of us might have a micro interest in a particular smart city, so it might be something as, our focus is water, or we want to know exactly where every single fire hydrant is within a particular city. Or we might have a much broader global understanding that we need to understand flow of traffic, or we might be planning for the future in terms of what those buildings are. So in terms of actually creating a smart city, there's a vast variety of different perspectives and I guess lenses in terms of how it is that you look at a smart city. So again, when you're looking at your piece of paper and you're wondering what you're going to write down and you're listening to the presenters today, pick your lens and describe your lens to us in terms of how it is that you're focusing on a smart city and what it is that you're trying to focus in on, and how big your scope is or how small your scope is in terms of what it is that you're looking for. So here's where I start asking for a little bit of interaction. These are the buzzwords that I heard out of Barcelona in terms of what you might describe around smart cities. So I've heard smart cities, I've heard sustainable cities, connected cities, resilient cities, future cities. Has anybody got another city for me in terms of description of terms? Everyone's wondering. Deb?
Knowledge cities.
Knowledge cities?
Eco city.
Eco city? Better cities?
Intelligent.
Intelligent cities?
Green city.
A green city. I like that one.
New city.
So a new city?
Ubiquitous.
Oh, ubiquitous. Okay, U city. Oh, I like that.
Sensing city. I have to do that.
You have. We would expect nothing less, Steve.
Global city.
A global city?
City next.
City next.
Next city.
Microsoft.
That is a Microsoft. It is, yeah. Excellent, I really appreciate those. The reason I asked that question is obviously I head the communications area of OGC. So understanding the language and again those perspectives of what everybody's hearing and how they're doing those descriptions of smart cities ultimately helps us in terms of how we then talk about what smart cities are and interact with the people working in them. So all of that extra information that you've just added, we will then actually be adding that into the communications that we start talking about and looking at how we engage using that language. So I picked this one out. Hopefully, did everybody get the email yesterday that had the white paper in it, draft that George has put together? Can I get a show of hands of anybody who didn't get it? John didn't get it? Okay. John, come and see us and we'll do that. Did everybody get a chance to have a quick look over the white paper? Most people? Excellent. There will be an opportunity to go through it in more detail later. But this particular definition comes out of that white paper, and George and I were talking this morning and he said he was certainly casting his eye to try and find a single definition about what a smart city actually is. And so I put this one up here, and I guess when I look at all of you in the room, this is obviously done, again, by one perspective and one organisation in terms of what, and they certainly did quite a bit of research and engagement before they put that down on paper as a definition. But when we think of ourselves as location professionals working in that geospatial field, and you look at this definition, does this actually fit for us? Is this actually representative of what we think is actually a smart city, and so therefore would be the guide and definition that we want to work with in terms of actually doing the development of standards within the OGC for what a smart city is? I'm not necessarily going to ask you to contribute to that one now, but again, when you're thinking today about what you're going to write down on your piece of paper, thinking about this definition, and there will be an opportunity to debate and talk about this later on in the day, if there's ways that we need to add to this definition or ways that we need to clarify. Chris has obviously got a question.
Yeah, my first thought on seeing that is it's been in the history of cities for a long time, and there's a very influential book called The Nomad and the City, and they were mutual. And the city is dependent on its surrounding environment, which may be quite big, maybe the whole country, maybe the whole region, to support it, right? And it's interactive. And this sort of puts forward the idea that that city can exist in isolation. Right? You just chuck off the planet and float it with an anti-gravity device and it will survive. It won't. Right? It's dependent on a big chunk of the earth to work. And that's not addressed in that definition.
I think I'd agree with you on that one. Not a perspective that I'd thought of, so it's a fantastic contribution. Carsten?
Well, to turn this around, Chris, maybe then the definition of a smart city is something where there's a vision that it could become self-sustained in the future, and only then it's smart.
That's a fair point too. Any other contributions to that discussion? No? So when we look at that smart cities concept then, here is me just trying to pick off a few, because of course this list is absolutely infinite in terms of what you can write up here in terms of where location fits when you start talking about a city. Certainly I guess one of the areas that I'm seeing is of the international organisations. There's I guess a concern about the growing amount of the world's population that's actually moving into an urban environment. You know, the World Health Organisation's statistics show that 54% of the world's population currently this year lives within an urban space. But the predictions are actually showing that sort of 2017, 2020, that actually that's going to rise to about 70% of the world's population that's now actually going to be in an urban space. So the impact then, and I think that actually goes really quite nicely to what Chris was saying, is that, well, okay, particularly if this city exists within an ecosystem that's outside of the urban environment, if you're now moving that population from outside of that and into an urban space, how does that alter that support system in terms of those people and shifting there? And of course, all of that's a location conversation, because it's people moving from somewhere to somewhere else. And so where location fits is very much about those citizens and understanding how and what it is that they relate to within that urban environment. I put up there visualising the city landscape. Obviously within OGC there's a number of different tools and pieces of work that we're actually doing now that look at visualisation. George corrected me this morning. I was going to sort of pick CityGML specifically up in there, and he said, well, you know, CityGML, it's got an element of the visual, but there's quite a lot more, and it fits more into what you're saying next in terms of understanding networks and infrastructure. So again, from a language perspective and how we take what is actually often a very technical thing that we do within OGC and help relate it to people who are trying to make their cities smart. Today is really important for us from a language perspective to understand all of these amazing tools and these amazing knowledge that we have and how we extract it out of OGC and actually share that with the broader community that's trying to build a smart city. To that end, obviously, today we're also going to look at networks and infrastructure. You know, there's a perspective here of looking at managing a city environment, and I guess use that word environment. People always think trees, etc. But you know, an environment is actually really just something in which entities are living. So understanding how you manage an urban space that might not necessarily have enough trees and might not necessarily have that, and how you still sustain the life that needs to be part of that environment. Planning for a future city, and I think that leads a little to what Carsten was sort of saying there. There's an element here in terms of what is smart. What is the future of what a city needs to be? Does our whole perception and concept of what a city and where things are within a city and how they interact with each other need to completely alter, particularly in that context of the relationship between urban and non-urban spaces? I think the OGC community, certainly when it comes to responding to disasters, is a piece of history for us that we have a lot of knowledge and wisdom that we can share within the space. And I put in here the creating spatial intelligence, which again, George looked at me this morning and he said, where did that come from? And I said, your white paper. And I said, but I quite like it because I think, you know, this word spatial, I've worked in this industry now for over 15 years, and often you say that word spatial and people immediately go, so that's to do with astronauts and going into outer space. And I'm like, well, no. But it is a really good term, and when you start unpacking the concept of being spatially aware and being spatially intelligent about what it is that's around you and where things are, there's a huge amount of knowledge there. And the people who are grappling at the moment with trying to build smart cities are not necessarily spatially intelligent, but this community is. And so how do we take the intelligence that we have and actually share that with the broader smart cities groups? So some thoughts for today. And again, I'd like you to think about these 3 questions primarily in terms of your pieces of paper and what you're going to put down and share with us. What is OGC already doing that can help with the vision of smart cities? And you'll see an element of that today. It's certainly not everything that we are doing within the OGC community, but the presenters you'll see today are certainly showcasing some of the work that will actually help with smart cities. But what are we missing? What is it that we're not currently doing that we need to be doing in order to ensure that we actually are relevant and we're valuable to the community out there that's actually trying to build a smart city, trying to understand the concept of a smart city? How do we engage with the broader audience in the globe that's outside of this room, particularly when you've got such difference in what cities are too? I mean, if you try and compare an emerging developing city coming out of Africa with a city like New York, you're like, well, how do you even make a measurement that's actually going to compare the two in terms of which one's smart? But all of that, again, is linked to location. So how do we as location specialists actually engage with that community to help educate them about it? And at the end of the day, what are your ideas about what it is that we should be doing? And please don't be shy about this. No matter how crazy or out there you think your concept is, we need to constantly be challenged in terms of what it is that we're doing in the organisation. And so if you think that there is something we're currently doing wrong, or we're missing, or there is a better way that we could be doing it, you really need to share that with the rest of the community rather than just keeping it to yourself, because it's the only way that OGC grows as an organisation in terms of what we do. So we have a rather jam-packed agenda. Like I said, I know that a number of you are going to probably move in and out of the room throughout a variety of different meetings today. But we're quite lucky to have Jimmy here talking with us this morning about a city and what the needs are and what the work is happening there. We're also very pleased to have Mitch Ikono here to talk with us about the work happening within ISO, certainly around health and wellbeing and looking at the metrics and so forth that are around that. And from there, we'll really start moving into some of the tools within OGC. So looking at things like City GML and Indoor GML. And just before lunch, what I'd like to do is actually start having a bit of that dialogue and discussion about what the thoughts are that you've started writing down. So let's have a look at the conversation that we've had in the morning about who's presented and actually start adding some things to it. What I'd ultimately really like to do with these pieces of paper is to be able to have them up and displayed for the rest of the week, to try and stimulate discussion with those that actually weren't in here this morning, and actually have people continue thinking about this as a topic for the rest of the week. So after lunch, and you will see time-wise that we are slightly half an hour or so out of sync with the rest of the day, and it was just really to try and keep the flow of the day going in terms of presenters, so I hope that it hasn't mucked up too much with your lunch plans of who you're meeting today. After lunch, we have Professor Shibasaki talking about, obviously, the moving pictures. How many people in the room are currently doing the experiment? Good, excellent. So hopefully we'll see a little bit of the analytics so far in terms of what's been collected and how the standard's being used. You'll then actually get Rich Khan talking about weather in the smart city and work that's coming out of the Met Office. Steve, are we going to hear that the SensorThing standard is actually finished and complete? Maybe. Certainly a standard that will hopefully be up and approved soon. And then in the afternoon, we get really interactive. So in the afternoon, you'll have a panel session up, and this is really about, at the end of the day, doing a big collection of knowledge and information, because what we want to do is take that white paper that George has written and add more of your contribution to it. So we want to walk out at the end of the day with something that we can actually publish from today's efforts to actually share with the rest of the world about what we're thinking in relation to what we're doing on smart cities and what we want to be doing on smart cities as well, and certainly around the language that we want to use to talk about it too. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. Again, if you are a social media user, here is the hashtag for the day in terms of talking about location powers, but also here are some of the people in the room that you've got as presenters today and their handles in terms of being able to follow what they're saying, and also if you want to refer to what they're talking about within their presentations today as well. Thank you for that. Are there any questions before I leave the podium about how today is going to proceed? No? Excellent. Then I will invite Jimmy to come to the podium and share his presentation with us.